Carlos Mendoza's life took a sudden, cruel turn when he was forced to confront his mother's amnesia and his overwhelming frustration. Elena, now 75 and battling the fog of memory loss, was a shadow of the vibrant woman she once was. Their interactions were strained, and every day felt like an emotional battle. One fateful day, Carlos, overwhelmed by a mix of resentment and duty, made a shocking decision. He abandoned Elena at an airport, hoping to find solace in the promise of a hidden inheritance that he had recently discovered. But as he raced to stop the departing plane, reality struck with devastating force. He was too late. In the following days, Carlos's actions came back to haunt him, revealing a heart-wrenching truth that no one could have anticipated. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Carlos Mendoza's gaze, laden with frustration and weary despair, fell upon his mother, Elena, who sat vacantly in her cherished armchair. At 75, Elena's once lively chestnut hair had surrendered to a cascade of untamed, snowy white strands, reflecting a neglect that mirrored the emotional chasm between them. Her face, now etched with profound, sorrowful lines, spoke of years that had weathered her spirit beyond recognition. "Mom, can you hear me?" Carlos's voice was an echo of strained patience, louder than necessary, and laden with an unspoken plea. Elena blinked with a slow, deliberate hesitation before shifting her gaze toward him, her eyes clouded with an unsettling, distant confusion. "Carlos, is that you, my dear child?" Her voice trembled, revealing the fragility of her recollection. Carlos, his fists clenched to suppress a rising tide of frustration, forced a semblance of calm as he responded, "Yes, Mom, it's me. I've told you countless times that I'm not a child anymore. I'm 48 now." Elena's faint smile flickered briefly, a ghostly glimmer of recognition illuminating her eyes before she retreated into her cocoon of silence and disorientation. The harsh reality of Elena's amnesia had been a cruel blow delivered 2 years prior, but for Carlos, the passage of time had turned it into a ceaseless torment. His once vibrant life, brimming with aspirations and dreams, had been consumed by the relentless demands of caring for a woman who, more often than not, failed to remember his very existence. As he busied himself with the evening meal in the kitchen, a wave of melancholy nostalgia washed over him. He recalled a time when his mother was a beacon of strength and unwavering love, a woman whose sacrifices knew no bounds. That indomitable spirit now seemed a distant memory, replaced by a fragile, bewildered figure who demanded ceaseless care. The sudden chime of the doorbell shattered the solitude of his introspection, drawing him away from his thoughts and back to the present moment, where the weight of his current reality bore down heavily upon him. The letter began with the heartfelt salutation, "Dear son," capturing Carlos's immediate attention. As he read the carefully penned words, his heart raced with anticipation and anxiety. The message within revealed an astonishing truth about their family's hidden legacy and inheritance of significant worth that had been concealed for years, shrouded in secrecy and mystery that his father had never fully clarified. The letter detailed untapped accounts and properties scattered across distant lands of which Carlos had been entirely unaware. "Your mother holds all the vital information," the letter concluded with a sense of urgency. "She is the gateway to unlocking this long-hidden treasure." As Carlos absorbed this revelation, a tempest of thoughts and emotions surged within him. The notion of a concealed fortune, with his mother as the sole key to its discovery, ignited a tumultuous blend of greed and desperation. His gaze fell upon the closed door of his study, his mind's eye envisioning Elena in the living room, her once vibrant presence now diminished by the fog of her fragmented memories. The weight of the potential inheritance was both exhilarating and burdensome, painting a vivid, albeit unsettling, picture of a future devoid of financial strain and unending worries. Yet the stark reality of his mother's current state struck him with brutal clarity. She was incapable of offering any coherent guidance. His hands trembled as they rested on his face, overwhelmed by the weight of years filled with sacrifice and unspoken resentment. How long had Elena concealed this monumental secret from him? Why had she chosen not to reveal it before illness rendered her incapable of clarity? A surge of bitterness engulfed him. His entire adult life had been a relentless battle, and now the cruel irony struck him hard as life could have been profoundly different. The image of his fragile, detached mother merged with the alluring promise of newfound wealth and liberation, creating a harrowing juxtaposition in his mind. At that moment, a dark, insidious thought began to take root, a chilling and enticing notion. If his mother's incapacitation made her incapable of managing herself, wouldn't it be more practical to seek a final, definitive resolution? Carlos shut his eyes tightly, wrestling with the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. The decision he faced that night was not merely a choice, but a pivotal moment that would irreversibly alter the trajectory of their lives. As dawn broke, Carlos emerged from the night's turmoil with deep, dark circles under his eyes and a steely resolve in his gaze. The hours he had spent in anguished contemplation had been dedicated to meticulously planning and calculating every aspect of. "Are you ready for our adventure?" Mom Carlos asked, his voice trembling with a forced cheerfulness as he assisted Elena in standing from her chair. Elena's smile, a rare and genuine beacon that illuminated her deeply etched wrinkles, nearly broke through the icy wall of his resolve. Her eyes, bright with innocent joy, filled Carlos with a pang of remorse so sharp it nearly made him reconsider his dark plan. "I'm always ready with you, my child," she responded, her words brimming with warmth and trust that almost shattered his carefully constructed facade. For a fleeting moment, he wrestled with the idea of abandoning his plan, of confessing his intentions and seeking help to escape the moral abyss he had plunged into. Yet the tantalizing promise of a worry-free future and the alluring image of the letter's hidden treasure drove him forward, the shadows of greed and desperation compelling him to stay the course. As the taxi pulled away from the familiar confines of their home, Carlos cast a final, lingering look at the house that had been the backdrop of so many shared moments, both joyous and sorrowful. In his mind, he meticulously reviewed every detail of his elaborate scheme, every carefully constructed alibi, every potential pitfall. There was no turning back now. The drive to the airport was an agonizing journey, each passing minute stretching into an eternity of silent torment. Elena, her spirit still buoyed by the thrill of the unknown, excitedly pointed out the changing scenery outside the window. Her enthusiasm, so pure and untainted, was a stark contrast to the dark thoughts swirling within Carlos's mind. He gripped her hand tightly, the weight of his decision pressing down on him with unbearable intensity. The airport, looming like a giant, implacable beast on the horizon, represented the point of no return, a place where his carefully laid plans would either come to fruition or unravel completely. As they entered the bustling terminal, the cacophony of voices, the incessant hum of rolling suitcases, and the frenetic movement of travelers seemed to engulf them in an oppressive fog of confusion and anxiety. Carlos maneuvered Elena's wheelchair through the sea of passengers, his heart pounding in his chest with a rhythm that threatened to betray his inner turmoil. Elena's voice, small and tinged with apprehension, broke through the overwhelming noise. "Where are we?" "There are so many people," she asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and unease. Carlos leaned in closer, his forced smile masking the churning storm of guilt and fear within him. "We're at the airport, Mom. Remember? We're going on a trip," he said, his voice steady but hollow, each word a deliberate attempt to maintain the facade of normalcy. Elena's nod was slow and uncertain, her eyes darting around as if trying to grasp the enormity of the situation. The pang of guilt that pierced his heart was quickly stifled as they stood in line for check-in. Carlos's mind raced as he mentally reviewed the intricate details of his plan. He had meticulously chosen a flight to a remote city, deliberately selected to have multiple layovers, creating a convoluted trail designed to be as difficult to trace as possible. With each step they took toward the check-in counter, Carlos felt the weight of his decision pressing heavier upon him. Elena's soft murmurings, filled with genuine curiosity and confusion, contrasted sharply with the cold, calculated nature of his actions. As they approached the counter, Carlos's heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of his carefully orchestrated scheme. And as he looked at his mother, her trustful eyes reflecting a blend of excitement and apprehension, he struggled to keep his own emotions in check. The decision he had made was irrevocable, and the path he was on would forever alter the course of their lives. "Passports, please," requested the counter clerk, her professional smile barely concealing the scrutiny in her eyes. Carlos, his hand trembling uncontrollably, handed over the documents. Each second dragged painfully as he awaited the clerk's verdict. His mind raced with worry. Would anyone see through his facade? Would the clerk detect something amiss? "Everything is in order," the woman finally declared, her voice a small relief in the sea of tension. "Have a good trip." A sigh of relief escaped Carlos's lips, a fragile moment of peace amidst his internal storm. The first hurdle had been cleared. As they moved towards the security checkpoint, Elena began to fidget, her unease becoming palpable. "Carlos, I don't feel well. I want to go home." Elena's voice trembled with discomfort, and panic seized Carlos momentarily. "Calm down, Mom. Everything is all right. We'll be on the plane soon, and you can rest." Then he reassured her with a forced calmness. They navigated through security without incident, although Carlos felt the penetrating stares of the guards as accusatory, their gazes piercing through his carefully constructed mask of normalcy. Elena, blissfully unaware of the tension, hummed softly, lost in the echoes of a distant, faded memory. Finally, they reached the waiting area. Carlos glanced at his watch. An excruciating hour stretched before him, an abyss filled with swirling doubts and gnawing remorse. Every minute seemed to elongate into an eternity of anxious anticipation. "Mom, I'm going to get something to drink." "Stay here." "Okay," Carlos said, trying to keep his voice steady as he carefully positioned Elena's wheelchair in a secluded corner. Elena's eyes, filled with a mix of vulnerability and longing, followed him. "Don't take too long, son. Don't leave me alone," she pleaded, her voice tinged with a fragile fear that pierced Carlos's heart like a dagger. At that moment, his resolve wavered, and he saw not just his mother but the woman who had nurtured and sacrificed everything for him. Her gaze held a mirror to his guilt and the immense weight of his decision. Yet the seductive allure of the inheritance and the promise of a worry-free existence loomed larger. With one last pained look at Elena, Carlos walked away, each step a painful departure from the mother who had been a pillar of his life. The point of no return approached with relentless certainty. When Carlos returned to the waiting area, he wore a forced smile that barely masked the turmoil roiling within him. Elena was asleep in her wheelchair, her head resting gently against the seat. He approached her with a delicate touch, gently waking her. "We're boarding soon, Mom." "Just a little while longer," he said, his voice a strained attempt at normalcy. The agony of his decision pressed heavily on him as he looked at his mother, her peaceful face betraying no hint of the storm brewing within her son's heart. The flight seemed interminable, a grueling journey through cramped quarters and stifling air that mirrored the turbulence within Carlos's mind. Each passing hour dragged with an excruciating slowness, every minute weighed down by his mounting anxiety. Carlos kept his eyes glued to the in-flight map, the progression of the aircraft marked in painfully slow increments. His heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation as he mentally rehearsed the final stages of his intricate plan. Elena, blissfully unaware of the gravity of their situation, slept soundly beside him, her rhythmic breathing a stark contrast to the storm roiling within him. Her serene face, framed by her silvery hair, was a cruel reminder of the innocence he was about to betray. As the plane began its descent into the remote city, Carlos's thoughts churned furiously. He meticulously reviewed each step of his plan, visualizing the sequence of events that would follow their arrival. The remote city, chosen for its obscurity and distance from familiar territories, was the setting for the final, crucial phase of his scheme. He knew every detail had to be flawless, for the consequences of failure would be dire. Upon landing, Carlos maneuvered Elena through the bustling airport with a calculated detachment. Every movement was deliberate, every glance a measured effort to avoid drawing attention. The local taxi, arranged to preserve their anonymity, awaited them outside. As they drove through the city, Carlos's mind raced, unable to shake the gnawing doubts that plagued him. The cityscape blurred past, a relentless reminder of the choices he had made and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The taxi finally arrived at a secluded part of the city, far from the bustling tourist districts. The area was characterized by its dilapidated buildings and quiet streets, a stark contrast to the lively and familiar environments they had left behind. Carlos guided Elena to a rundown hotel, its exterior marred by peeling paint and flickering neon lights. The hotel seemed to blend into the urban decay, its presence barely noticeable amidst the surrounding grime. Under a carefully chosen pseudonym, Carlos checked them in, each interaction meticulously controlled to avoid raising suspicion. As night fell, the weight of Carlos's plan reached its zenith. The darkness outside seemed to reflect the moral shadow he was navigating. Every step he took toward Elena's room felt like a step further from the person he had once been. He had arranged everything to ensure that Elena would be left behind, abandoned in this unfamiliar place, cut off from any means of reaching out for help. Once Elena was settled into the dingy room, Carlos faced the final, most agonizing part of his plan, leaving her there, alone and vulnerable. Her frail form, slumped in the worn armchair, was a stark contrast to the vibrant woman she once was. The sight of her, so trusting and helpless, tugged mercilessly at his conscience, a constant reminder of the love and sacrifices she had made for him over the years. The emotional strain was palpable, but Carlos forced himself to remain focused on the future he had envisioned for himself. As he walked out of the hotel, Carlos stole one last, heart-wrenching glance at Elena. Her fragile figure, now a mere silhouette against the dim light of the hotel lobby, was a stark reminder of the gravity of his actions. His heart ached with a profound sense of loss, but the vision of a worry-free life and the allure of the hidden inheritance drove him forward. Each step away from the hotel felt like a step deeper into a moral quagmire, but he pressed on, his mind resolute despite the turmoil. The return flight was a cold and uneventful journey, mirroring the numbness that had settled over Carlos. He arrived back home with a grim sense of accomplishment, but the weight of his actions hung heavily over him. The meticulous planning had paid off in terms of execution, but the aftermath was fraught with unexpected complexities. The inheritance remained elusive, shrouded in a veil of uncertainty and frustration. The weight of his actions, the guilt of abandoning his mother, was a constant burden that overshadowed any sense of triumph. The following days were a blur of anxiety and fear. Carlos struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the enormity of his choices weighed heavily on him. The thought of leaving his mother alone and vulnerable in a foreign city gnawed at his conscience, each passing moment a reminder of the cost of his decisions. The inheritance, which had seemed so tantalizingly close, remained just out of reach, leaving Carlos with a profound sense of regret and an ever-deepening sense of guilt. The dark idea that had driven him to this point had revealed its true consequences, and Carlos was left grappling with the complex web of moral and emotional fallout that ensued. "It means," the detective continued, his voice softer now, tinged with empathy, "that Elena is enduring prolonged episodes of confusion. At times she finds herself lost in the past, unable to recognize her current surroundings or the people around her." Carlos sank heavily into his chair, the weight of guilt pressing down on him like a suffocating blanket. His heart pounded painfully in his chest as the detective's words reverberated through his mind. "Is this condition permanent?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, struggling to contain the swell of regret and sorrow. "It's too early to make a definitive assessment," Ramirez responded, his tone measured and calm. "However, the doctors have discovered another troubling issue. It appears Elena has been concealing more than just her amnesia." Carlos's eyes widened, a sense of dread clawing at him. "What are you saying?" he asked, sitting upright, his posture rigid with tension. "They've identified signs of an untreated heart condition," Ramirez explained. "Elena will require additional tests, and there's a possibility that surgery may be necessary." The news struck Carlos with the force of a gut-wrenching blow. The realization that he had not only abandoned his mother but had also been oblivious to her serious medical condition hit him with the brutality of a cold, harsh truth. How long had Elena been enduring her suffering in silence, and how had he been so blind to her pain? At that precise moment, a nurse rushed into the room, her face a mixture of urgency and concern. "Excuse me, but Mrs. Mendoza is asking for her son. She seems to be having a rare moment of clarity," she said, casting a desperate glance at the detective. Ramirez nodded, granting permission with a subtle gesture. Carlos's heart pounded as he followed the nurse to Elena's hospital room, his steps feeling leaden. When he entered, the sight of his mother lying in the hospital bed, looking frail and vulnerable, pierced him deeply. "Mom," Carlos called out, his voice cracking with emotion as he approached her bedside. "Come closer, son," Elena said, her voice faint but filled with a poignant clarity. Carlos took her hand gently, his grip trembling as he felt the frailness of her once strong hands. "Mama, Elena cut him off, her gaze intense despite her weakened state. "Listen to me, I don't have much time before the confusion returns. There's something you need to know about the inheritance. About your father," she said, her voice urgent and strained. Carlos leaned in, hanging on every word as Elena began to unveil long-buried family secrets. Each revelation was a piece of the puzzle that had been missing from his understanding for years. The complexity and gravity of the truth unfolded before him, more painful and intricate than he could have ever anticipated. As Elena's voice faltered and she finished her confession, exhaustion overtaking her, Carlos felt hot tears streaming down his face. The truth he had so desperately sought and manipulated others to uncover now lay bare in front of him, casting a new, agonizing light on the choices he had made. The weight of the revelations, combined with the raw intensity of his guilt, left him reeling, grappling with the reality that the inheritance was not just a matter of financial gain, but a deep, tangled legacy of love, loss, and profound regret. As Elena slipped into a restless slumber, Carlos remained steadfastly by her side, gripping her frail hand with a mix of desperation and devotion. Outside their dimly lit room, Detective Ramirez lingered, his patience thin as he prepared for the next phase of the investigation. Carlos was acutely aware that the road ahead was fraught with challenges, yet for the first time in a long while, a glimmer of hope pierced through his desolation. The journey towards redemption promised to be arduous and unyielding, but now he found renewed strength in a profound reason: the unwavering, boundless love of his mother, who, despite the tumult and despair, had never wavered in her faith in him. The subsequent days were an exhausting blur of medical procedures and legal interrogations. Carlos was torn between the sterile confines of the hospital room and the cold, unfeeling precincts of the police station. Sleep eluded him as he wrestled with worry and fatigue. Elena's health seemed to waver like a fragile flame, with moments of sharp clarity giving way to deep, disorienting confusion. One particularly grim afternoon, as Carlos maintained a weary vigil at his mother's bedside, Dr. Sanchez entered, his face etched with grim seriousness. "Mr. Mendoza," the doctor began, his voice heavy with gravity, "we have the results of your mother's cardiac tests. She urgently requires surgery. Without it, her prognosis is grim." Carlos felt as though the very ground had been ripped from beneath him. "How much will it cost?" "I'll do anything necessary," he implored, desperation lacing his voice. The doctor's response was a staggering figure that drained the color from Carlos's face. With his financial resources frozen due to the ongoing investigation and the enigmatic inheritance still out of reach, he felt utterly helpless. In that crushing moment, Elena stirred and called out weakly, "Carlos." Her mention of a picture at home earlier now took on new significance. Overwhelmed with urgency, Carlos shook Detective Ramirez with a frenzied intensity. "My mother spoke of a picture at our house. It might hold the key to something crucial." Ramirez, though initially dubious, consented to accompany Carlos back to the Mendoza home. As they arrived, the tension was palpable. In the dimly lit living room, they discovered the picture Elena had referred to, a faded, vintage family portrait. With trembling hands, Carlos removed it from the wall, uncovering a hidden safe behind it. "We'll need a warrant to," Ramirez began, but the significance of their find was already clear. "The surgery has concluded," Dr. Sanchez announced, his tone grave, but tinged with a flicker of hope. "It was a complex procedure, but Elena's strength has shown through. The next 48 hours will be critical." Carlos released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Can I see her?" "Once she's been settled into intensive care," the doctor replied. "But bear in mind, her condition remains fragile. She will need time and meticulous care to recover." As the doctor departed, Carlos turned to Lucia with a mixture of anxiety and gratitude. "I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how I'll manage everything with the investigation still ongoing." Lucia stepped in with resolute determination. "I'll stay with her. You must focus on addressing the legal issues. It's the very least you owe your mother." Carlos nodded, his emotions a tumultuous blend of appreciation and self-consciousness as he braced himself for the relentless questioning ahead. A firm resolve took root within him. He was prepared to confront every consequence of his past actions, regardless of the personal toll. The interrogation room was stark and unwelcoming, mirroring the bleakness of Carlos's mood. Detective Ramirez laid out an array of documents on the cold metal table before him. "Mr. Mendoza," Ramirez began, his voice heavy with solemnity, "the accusations against you are grave abandonment of a vulnerable individual, negligence, and potential fraud." Carlos met his gaze with a face etched in regret. "I understand, Detective. I'm ready to face the repercussions of my actions." Ramirez studied him intently before continuing. "However, there's an important aspect you should be aware of. Your cooperation and the evidence you provide could significantly impact the outcome of your case." Carlos's confusion was palpable. "What are you saying?" "We've been investigating Morales for some time now. Your actions today, though driven by personal motives, have inadvertently assisted in his capture. This could be beneficial for you." Carlos's eyes widened with a flicker of hope. "So, there's a possibility for leniency?" "There's always a possibility," Ramirez said, "but you must continue to cooperate fully." As the days stretched into weeks, the courtroom became a battleground of legal and emotional turbulence. As we wrap up today's video, let's take a moment to reflect on the journey we've explored together. We've witnessed Carlos's profound struggle and commitment as he navigates both personal and legal challenges, all while holding on to hope and making crucial decisions for his mother. What have you learned from Carlos's story? How do his experiences and the emotional depth of his situation resonate with you? Share in the comments below one key takeaway you've gained and how you plan to apply it in your own life. If you found this video insightful, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Your support helps us continue bringing valuable stories and lessons to you.